when the conversation about coming to Copenhagen first began, and Tina and I began emailing each other about the possibility of applying for observer status as an NGO, two questions occurred to me immediately, and they're questions, I think, that are actually sustainable, meaning endurable, ones that we all have to face. The first question is, who are we to imagine that we might make a difference? The second question is, who are we not to? And the first question leads us in the direction of humility, which is a core attribute of mediators and of conflict resolution in general. The second is more difficult. The second question leads us in the direction of audacity. The audacity of hope, if I can quote President Obama. And hope is an audacious thing to do. But in order for us to be able to succeed at this, we have to think about how we change the climate of all the conversations that are taking place around climate change. And some of this is really directed at the mediators in the group, and some of it is directed at those of you who may have some passing familiarity with conflict resolution, but may not have an understanding of some of the technical aspects of it. And some of it is pushing it a little bit beyond the range of what is acceptable. So the title is Conflict Revolution, which is the title of a book that I just wrote. And what it means is that the problems that we are now confronting require changes that are not simply incremental. So we'll describe exactly what this term means as we go along.
Can you keep the mic
a little closer, yes. And this is what? Ah, yes, the clicker. Thank you. Oh. Two quotations, first from the Dalai Lama. We and they no longer exist. The destruction of one area is the destruction of yourself. That is the new reality. Second is from Al Gore. Ecology is the study of balance, and some of the same, that should say, principles that govern the healthy balance of elements in the global environment also apply to the healthy balance of forces making up our political system. In my view, however, our system is on the verge of losing its essential equilibrium. The problem is not so much one of policy failures. Much more worrisome are the failures of candor, evasions of responsibility, and timidity of vision that characterize too many of us in government. And I think that we all see that some of these same attributes are present here. So here's a diagram of exponential change. It's what it looks like. This is what we are facing. But I'd like to tell you, I'm not sure how to mute this. There we go. I'd like to tell you just a very brief story about exponential change and the difficulty of understanding it. To give you a scientific example, here's the example. Imagine for a moment that you have a glass like this one. And in this glass are two bacteria. And imagine for a moment that we know in advance that these bacteria will double in population every second. And at the end of 1 hour, every minute. And imagine that at the end of 1 hour, the bacteria will fill the glass. The question is, how much warning time do the bacteria have that they are about to fill the glass? And the answer is, at 59 minutes to the hour, the glass is only half full. At 2 minutes to the hour, the glass is a quarter full. And we are now on this planet living with a glass that is 1/4 full, at least. And the difficulty, truthfully, is nobody knows where it's going to go. Nobody knows where it's going to end. And it's too dangerous not to begin to do something about it. We all know these things, I think. So what's changing rapidly in the world? Well, it's not just climate. And it's not just CO2 and methane emissions. It's the power and availability of military technology, species extinctions and loss of tropical rainforest and woodland, loss of potable water and arable land. I won't go down the list, but you can see that if we get any one of these wrong, we are in serious trouble. What is not changing rapidly enough? Implementation of solutions to poverty and hunger, reductions in bigotry and prejudice, all of these items. The one I want to focus on is the last one, awareness of the extent and seriousness of global problems. We heard Albert Einstein quoted before. After the atomic bomb was dropped in Hiroshima, journalists went to interview Einstein and they asked him what he thought. And he said, in quotes, "Everything has changed except the way we think." And with regard to climate change, everything has changed except the way we think. And the way we think includes how we handle our disagreements with each other, the processes that are available for us to even talk about our problems. So a conflict revolution means we have to go much, much deeper than simply solving the problem. We have to solve the problem of solving problems. And that fundamentally is where mediation and conflict resolution can make their greatest contribution. These, I think, are from Jared Diamond's book, Collapse. If you're not familiar with it, it's an excellent treatise on ecological collapse and on what I think is increasingly being referred to as ecocide. These are the problems that we need to be able to face and do something about. So the difficulty is we have chronic conflicts. Chronic conflicts are repeated conflicts. So here's a definition of chronic conflict. One, conflicts that nations, societies, organizations, or individuals, it doesn't matter, because the lessons from mediation apply to all of these. That the conflicts that these people or groups have not fully resolved, that they need to resolve in order to grow and evolve, that they are capable of resolving, because if they aren't capable of resolving them, it doesn't show up as a chronic conflict. It's simply a state of being. And that they can only resolve by abandoning old approaches and adopting new ones, and are resistant to resolving because they're frightened, dissatisfied, insecure, uncertain, angry, or unwilling to change. Here are 4 meta-sources of chronic conflict, meaning if you take a look at the last couple thousand years of human history, these are the ones that show up, in my view, most often. First, ecological degradation. Second, social inequality. Third, economic inequity. And fourth, political autocracy. These are guaranteed to cause repeated conflicts. And what this means is it becomes very, very difficult to reach an agreement in the presence of social inequality. If some people are treated as more equal than others or have greater resources, this becomes an obstacle to their agreement, and that becomes itself a source of chronic conflict. The same with economic inequity and with political autocracy. So we see these issues surfacing in the course of the negotiations. Here's how mediators can help save the planet. I'm intentionally exaggerating this, so I hope you interpret this as a little bit tongue-in-cheek, because obviously we are small, little, well-meaning people who can't actually save the planet. And yet, here's the logic. 1, the problems we now face, of which climate change is only one, can no longer be solved locally or even by a consortium of the largest nation states. It requires everybody's cooperation, because if there are significant numbers of nations that do not participate, it isn't going to happen. 2, there are no international organizations, including the United Nations, that are presently capable of solving these problems. And they extend to bird flu, toxic chemicals, etc. 3, none of these problems can be solved through force or litigation. 4, bitter conflicts and diverse opinions are widespread between nations, political groups, and environmental organizations, so that whether these problems even exist, who's responsible for them, and how to solve them. These are blocking us from reaching an agreement, and the dispute resolution mechanisms that are currently in place are incapable of resolving them quickly or deeply enough. I think we have an understanding of this. And therefore, I shouldn't say and therefore, not yet. If we do not solve them fully and in time, hundreds of millions, perhaps billions of people will die. Thousands of species will become extinct, and the earth may become uninhabitable. This building in which we are having this meeting right now will be underwater if we do not succeed. This building, this country will be underwater. Your country will be underwater. And we will all be underwater, unfortunately, in that sense. So, I'm not going to go through these, but basically what this means, the next to the last item, is we need to vastly increase our skills in cross-cultural communication, prejudice reduction and bias awareness, creative informal problem solving, group facilitation, public dialogue, collaborative forms of negotiation, mediation, conflict resolution, systems design. These are all mechanisms that we have available to us that can help us resolve the problems. Here's what Dr. Martin Luther King wrote. We will have to repent in this generation. He was referring, of course, to my generation in terms of the civil rights movement, but it applies equally to us today. We will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the vitriolic words or actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people. We must come to see that human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It is not inevitable that we will solve this problem. It comes through the tireless efforts and persistent work of men and women, and without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the forces of social, and here we can say, ecological stagnation. We must use time creatively and forever realize that the time is always ripe to do right. So, where do we go from here? Here are some skills that we have that we can use. We have communication skills, negotiation skills, emotional processing skills, mediation skills, community building skills, etc. We can engage in capacity building, and this is the central mission of Mediators Beyond Borders, to build personal capacity in individuals, real human beings on a local level. They're building their capacity for awareness, empathy, honesty, integrity, learning, and open-hearted communication. We can build interpersonal skills, and we can build a systemic capacity for designing preventative systems that will be sustainable. Here are some of the techniques that we have available, 12 sort of methodologies that are highly useful in building some of these skills, and many of us are trained in many of these technologies, and they include public policy and environmental mediation. We have in this room people who have done environmental mediations. I have done them. Kirk has done them. Others in the room have done them as well. So we finally come up to the problem of changing the way we change, because the method by which we try to bring about change and have tried to bring about changes in the past is not going to be successful in tackling this level of problem. There are several reasons why, but here's my favorite quote from Pablo Casals. Love of one's country is a beautiful thing, but why should it stop at the border? Isn't that beautiful? Why should it stop at the border? This is the fundamental philosophy of Mediators Beyond Borders. But we have created these borders in our minds. They don't exist in nature. And the borders are places that stop us from exercising our love for one another and our capacity to collaborate in solving problems. I especially like the second one. It's the opening quotation in the book that I wrote. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up the men to gather wood, divide the work, and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. Isn't that beautiful? Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. And what is this vast and endless sea that we're yearning for? You see it up here on the walls. You see it behind you in the charts that have come forward. It's a sea of human community. It's a sea of caring. It's a sea of deep involvement in helping one another live meaningful, productive, and happy lives. These are the things that we care about. And finally, the quote from Gandhi, who we spoke about earlier today. I will give you a talisman, and I want to change this a little bit. Whenever you are in doubt, or when the self becomes too much with you, apply the following test. Recall the face of the poorest and the weakest person whom you have seen, and ask yourself if the next step you contemplate is going to be of any use to that person. And now I'd like you to imagine the alliance of small island states. Many of them will disappear. And imagine the people who live in the Maldives, whose community is about to go underwater. Imagine them and ask yourself, is what we are doing going to be of any help to these people? So let's go back to the question of change. Here's a typical chart of what happens in the mismanagement of change. We have to watch out for this. We begin with high euphoria. Then there are growing concerns, near total disillusionment, unmitigated disaster, search for the guilty, punishment of the innocent, and promotion of the uninvolved. And this is a very common experience with the change process. The most important lesson about change, and I won't go into detail on this, is change is inevitable, improvement is optional. Whether we improve or not depends on our capacity for self-organization. Because negative change, if I can put it that way, things falling apart, another word for that is the second law of thermodynamics, and it is a law of the entire universe. Things fall apart. It is way easier to create a conflict than it is to resolve one. It's way easier to destroy an ecosystem than it is to create one. And so what we have to look at are some of these lessons from the change process. The most important thing, I think, for us to recognize is that incremental changes can lead to transformational change. And the little incremental changes that we have begun, starting with Tina imagining somehow that we might come here, and our beginning our correspondence, and then beginning to mobilize people. And we now have here in this room over 60 people from 20 countries who have come together here because we believe in what we are doing. And those are all a result of tiny little incremental changes, one person to the next, and that person to the next. And what has been remarkable about this entire process, and the way we know that this is an idea whose time has come, is because the path is simply opened in front of us. We haven't had to do anything. The way has been cleared before us. And so we know that this process that we are describing is one that has to succeed in order for any of the rest of it to finally and sustainably succeed in the long run. Why change efforts often fail? The change is too timid and does not include strategic or systemic objectives. Critics of useful ideas are excluded from the process. To some extent, this includes us. Internal and external conflicts are allowed to continue unresolved. Skills in communication and conflict resolution are not improved. Change is viewed as an important event as opposed to something that occurs every single day. It's looked at as something in the future, but the truth is it is happening at this very moment, right now, as we speak. Bureaucratic work takes time and energy from change efforts. You can go down this chart and you can see that this is actually a description of what we have been doing here and what has been happening here for a large part of this week. This is not at all to denigrate the efforts, the enormous efforts that have been made by the United Nations staff, by the Danish government, by all of the various delegates and delegations. It is simply to say that if you are trapped in that language that was so wonderfully described about section so-and-so, article such and such, it makes it very difficult to talk about what is really fundamental. So, I've been given a 5-minute warning, so I want to now skip ahead here. This is from Machiavelli, who after all knew what he was talking about. And he says, it must be considered that there is nothing more difficult to carry out or more doubtful of success nor more dangerous to handle than to initiate a new order of things. For the reformer has enemies in all those that profit by the old order, and only lukewarm defenders in all those who would profit by the new order. This lukewarmness arising partly from the incredulity of mankind who do not truly believe in anything new until they have had actual experience of it. And this, of course, extends to mediation. The reason we feel so passionately about this is because in our daily lives, every single day in my life, I confront people who are in conflict. 100% of the people who come to see me are totally and completely stuck and have no way of knowing how they're going to get out of it. And frankly, I don't either. And yet, by the end of that process, large numbers of people end up resolving their disputes and even go further and gain some fundamental insight into what before they had been blind to. So, we're going to skip over all of these now. What is a revolution? It's any deep, rapid, and fundamental change. It is the transformation of a system. It is the simultaneous alteration of content, process, and relationships. It is a shift in the dominant paradigm, culture, and way of thinking. It's the combination of significant losses and gains in a single series of events. It's the inability to live or solve problems in the old way. And it's the rise of a new order by means of disorder. So, any higher level of order that you want to achieve, in order to reach that higher level of order, has to go through a process of disorder. And the name for that disorder is conflict. And therefore, we can now see that conflict is simply the sound made by the cracks in the system. That's all it is. And the conflicts that we are getting here, the chronic conflicts, the repeated over and over and over again conflicts, are simply the sound made by the cracks in this system. And we have solutions for some of those cracks. So the last thing that I wanted to say, yes. Now, skip ahead. Oh. I think I just went the wrong way here. Well, I'll just tell you what, let's see. Andre Breton, you can't see the whole quote, but I'll tell you what it is. You can do it? Okay. What are we waiting for? A woman? 2 trees? 3 flags? Nothing. What are we waiting for? So here's your opportunity now to do something massively important. We have a few days left, and I really appreciate your comments earlier in helping us see how important it is to redouble our efforts to reach out to the delegates who are here and convince them, if not now, to plant a seed so that at some point in the future, the next time they realize that they're stuck in a conflict, some little part of their brain may go back and say, what was that I heard about conflict resolution? And maybe there is some solution. We are not asking for this to be done with us. This is not our task. This is the task of skilled professional conflict resolvers in every country and every area of the world. What is our task, really, is to help people understand and recognize how powerful a tool this actually is. So, this means a conflict revolution, a way of thinking about how we engage in conflict with one another that is nothing short of revolutionary. It means, unfortunately, therefore, something that requires us to change who we are, as well as changing the systems. Here's my last statement. There's a fundamental condition for change that was identified by Gandhi. And what Gandhi said is, we must be the change we want to see in the world. We have been that for this last week. We have worked at the Bell Center all this week. We have worked for these 2 days together with one another, and we have been with each other the change we want to see in this world. Isn't that right?
Yeah.